Hey everyone, welcome back to another Popcorn book review. Today we're going to be looking at Brian Jaques' Redwall. So we are only going to be looking at the first book in the series. It is a pretty big series. There's a list of 22 different books, so we're only looking at the very first one. Now the reason that I started reading these books, Ren recommended them to me after I found out Netflix had actually acquired the full licensing to all of these stories for a Netflix series. So I really wanted to read the books before I dove into that series once it's created. So we're going to do a really quick summary of what the book is. Now there's not going to be too many spoilers, nothing you really wouldn't find on the back of the book jacket, but there are going to be some spoilers throughout this video. Hopefully nothing that would ruin the book for you, but just a little bit of detail so that you can kind of get how I felt about the book and who I would recommend it to. In Mossflower Wood sits Redwall Abbey, full of woodland creatures living a monastic lifestyle. Clooney the Scourge, who's a sea rat with one eye, wants to subjugate the abbey. The main character, Matthias, a bumbling young church mouse, stumbles into his position of a hero. He goes on an epic adventure where he's captured by sparrows, causes a rebellion, is commandeered by shrews, threatened by a barn owl, and even nearly eaten by an adder. He restores hope to the people of the abbey and faces Clooney in a thrilling battle to the death. Now I know that's a pretty vague summary. It's almost interchangeable with really any action-adventure fantasy book. Trust me, it's way better than that. Now, I would say that the main theme of this book is definitely a good versus evil type book. You have Matthias, who is the main character, and he is good through and through. Every choice that he makes is to benefit the abbey, to save his people, to restore his land. He simply tries his best all the time. Now keep in mind he is a young mouse, so he does make mistakes. He's not absolutely perfect, but he does represent the purity of, the hero. Now on the other end of things is Clooney the Scourge, who is absolutely the most putrid of characters. Like, from the moment he shows up until the very end, you just hate this character. Like, he's definitely not a villain you love to hate. He's like, you just hate him. Like, he's murderous, he's conniving, he schemes, he betrays his own people. He's a really, really great villain within the story. So you have that very evident black and white, good versus evil type story. Now, the main characters in the book, there are a few main characters that we hear throughout the entire story. Now, I'm not going to ruin who they are because some of them are pretty unlikely. I didn't think that they were going to be as important as they were throughout the story. But as I kept reading, their importance grew with every single page. So that's one thing I would say about this book, that if the character has a name and they show up once, they're going to be important to the story. They're going to help Matthias, they're going to help Clooney, they're going to battle, they're going to fight, and their mortality is going to be tested. So I think that that's something really great about these characters, is you have your, of course, main two characters of the good and the evil, but every other character that's mentioned plays their part, and they are important. So I would say keep your eyes and ears open as you're reading or listening to this book, and remember who you're reading, and because they're going to show up again later. Now there are a couple of things that I really, really love about the book. The first one is going to be the characters. They're extremely well developed. They each have their own unique personalities that shine through on every single page with everything that they say and do. No two characters are forgettable in the sense you can't mistake one for the other. They're all very unique and they develop differently for every single character, which is really impressive in storytelling, that you don't mix up two characters. The second thing that I really love about this book is the world building experience. So you genuinely believe that Mossflower Wood is a medieval place with an abbey and these creatures are real. Every single detail is just juicy and really well thought out that makes you feel like you're sitting in this location. Not to mention the description of the feasts definitely make your mouth water. Finally, it never feels like there's a dull moment in the story. The pacing, in my opinion, is perfect. It doesn't feel like there's a page that misses or is useless. Every single page that I read felt like it served a purpose with the story and the plot and developing characters. It never felt like, I could put it down or that I wanted to stop reading. So everything fit really well together, and it's a very easy, very fast read. Now don't get me wrong, as good as this book is, there were a few things that I didn't like about the book. One of the first things that I noticed and kind of didn't enjoy while reading the book was the use of such large vocabulary. Now, I don't typically mind when larger words or, you know, something is very eloquent and wordy shows up in a book. However, in this one it felt rather clunky, almost as though a thesaurus was used so that no two words were ever the same. It felt kind of like a mouthful that sometimes just didn't quite fit the story or the characters that were saying them. So that's really one of the biggest things that I disliked about the book, was that even though it was a very easy book to read and it went by very quickly, some of the vocabulary just felt out of place. The main thing with those vocabulary words is oftentimes they were confusing not only in the context, but Jaques also utilized a lot of very specific terms for weaponry, armor, and architectural jargon. I am not familiar with any of those things, so I have to stop, look it up, see what it typically looks like. That way I could imagine it in my head. The final thing that I wouldn't say I hated in the book or that I strongly disliked, but it just kind of threw me off, but only in the beginning, was the scale. So the scale of these creatures feels very elastic. Sometimes I could really get the imagery of these small woodland creatures, these tiny church mice, and their little habits and sandals and things like that, living the friar lifestyle. And then other times it was very confusing where, like, the rats are riding horses. So are they human-sized rats or are they tiny horses? It was very difficult for me to wrap my head around the scale of these creatures in this location. Just because sometimes they were written as though they're tiny little creatures, as they would be in referencing scale to humans, and then other times they're written in a very human-like manner that makes them feel like they would be larger than what they actually are. So that was very confusing to me in the beginning before I just stopped looking so closely at it and trying to apply logic to their size and just read it as a fantasy novel, that it didn't matter how big they were, and just kind of let the story be the story without trying to think too much about their size. But that is one thing that I had a really hard time with in the first couple of chapters, was trying to understand how big these creatures are, how big this land is, how big the abbey is. It made it kind of difficult to picture it when I first started the book. A couple of things that I find really, really interesting about this novel is, first of all, it's an emotional roller coaster. If you think of an emotion, you're probably going to feel it in this book. Jaques has a brilliant way of just making the reader feel everything that these characters are feeling. So you're going to feel extreme happiness and excitement and love and joy as these characters feel it in the book, but that also means that you're going to feel the hatred, the extreme hatred, thanks to Clooney. You're also going to feel a lot of heartbreak. The story has a lot of really sad scenes in it as well. That's what happens anytime you have a book with war and battles and those types of themes in it. So you do feel that heartbreak as well. Which brings me to the next interesting part about the book, is the aspect of mortality. So most fantasy books, especially in children's books, have the same tropes of good versus evil, the big battle at the end, but not a lot of them play with the idea of mortality. So I really love that Jaques was able to incorporate the idea of mortality into his book. Characters do die, some of them tragically, some of them not so tragically. But at the end of the day, you're still playing with the idea of death in a children's book, and I think that that's a really important aspect, especially when you have a storyline that is so heavily focused on a giant battle and war, and especially with someone so evil like Clooney, who there is no give or take. When he said you either bend the knee or you die, he meant it. And so I think to have that type of intense war between these two groups of characters, if there was no death, there was no mortality, I would feel it would be really out of place and really awkward. that just magically everyone survived and, you know, the bad guy just kind of runs away in the end. I don't think that that would be as satisfying of an ending as how this book did end. Again, I'm not going to give away too much, but a lot of characters don't make it, and I think that that's something that's really interesting about this book. Now, the Redwall series is actually a massive series. There's 22 books altogether. So Redwall is the first book in the publication order, so it was the first book that Jaques wrote. However, it doesn't come into play chronologically until book 9. So if you're interested in reading the series and you want to read them in order of publication, that's super easy. You can go ahead and Google it to see which one came out first, and then it's actually in the jacket of the book, it'll tell you which one comes next. However, if you are more interested in reading them in chronological order, I'm actually going to put that in the description for you guys, so that way you can see where they fall in the lineup if you want to read them in order according to the story itself. So for this one, Redwall is the first book in the order of publication, being published in 1986. However, if you wanted to read them chronologically, it doesn't come in until book 9. So there can be some confusion there, just to clear that up. It's the first in publication, however, chronologically it's the 9th book. Again, I'm going to put that list in the description for you guys in case you wanted to check it out a little bit later. Now, if you've read Redwall and you really enjoyed the book and you want to read something similar, there are a couple books that I would recommend for you. First and foremost would be The Secret of Nim. It has the anthropomorphic animals, the idea of good versus evil, you know, the concept of mortality. A lot of really similar plot points come into play with The Secret of Nim. So that would be the first one that I would recommend. But if you like the writing style of Redwall and you want to read something similar, I would recommend more like Artemis Fowl, The Chronicles of Narnia, those types of books, pretty similar to Redwall. So I would recommend those. Now, if you do fall on a more mature scale of Redwall readers, I would recommend The Sword of Shanara. It's a trilogy. It's phenomenal. It's written by Terry Brooks. I would say that's probably one of my favorite fantasy novels. So that would be the one I would recommend for maybe a more mature reader. So who would I recommend this book to? I would recommend it to anybody that loves fantasy and adventure. If you want to get lost in an imaginary world full of quests and magic and woodland creatures, I would definitely say this book is for you. Now, if you're a parent seeing if this book is good for your kid, I would say if your child is in single digits, you might want to read it first and make that decision based on their own personalities and how well they can understand some darker concepts of death and dying and what true evil can really look like. So that is the one thing that I would be cautious of for younger kids, is there is descriptive death in this book. Again, if you enjoy like a fast-paced, easy read, I would say go for it. I read this book in a few days, and it was a really enjoyable read for me. So I would say if you enjoy fantasy at all, give it a shot. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to let me know what you think of Redwall down in the comments below. And also, what should I read next? The world's an open book and I'm ready to read it. So don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe and follow us on our Facebook page. Catch you next time. Toodles!